The stories you'll hear here are bound by nothing but time itself. Welcome to Eternal Voices.
Hate, for all its fury and destructiveness, is often honest. It marches in plain sight, raises its voice, burns bridges, and declares itself an enemy. It is easier to fight what is clearly against you. Hate is like fire, it consumes, but once extinguished, you know what has been lost and what needs rebuilding. But envy is a quiet poison. It rarely announces itself. It does not need to scream because it lives in the soft corners of everyday life. It speaks in subtle glances, in almost imperceptible delays before applause, in words of advice that seem kind but cut deeply. It wears the mask of concern. It wraps itself in tradition, in obligation, in care. And because of this, it is not always seen as the threat it is. Envy doesn't come from strangers shouting across battle lines. It often comes from the people who sit beside you at dinner. The ones who say they love you, and sometimes even do. The cruel truth is that some of the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. A family member who praises you in public but criticizes you in private. A childhood friend who celebrates your growth but keeps reminding you where you came from. A parent whose unhealed regrets echo in the advice they give you. These people aren't villains. They are complex, wounded, human, often unaware of the harm they cause. But their words, their silences, their subtle envy becomes a part of you. Their voices settle in your mind and continue to speak long after the conversation has ended. These are what I call eternal voices. Not because they are divine or immortal in the mystical sense, but because they persist. They echo through your decisions, your self-worth, your dreams. The eternal voice of a mother who always made you feel almost enough. The eternal voice of a brother who never quite celebrated your success. The eternal voice of a community that asked you to play small so others wouldn't feel insecure. These voices live within us, layered into our identities. We carry them unknowingly until one day we hear ourselves repeating them to ourselves. Or worse, to others. The tragedy is not that these voices exist, but that we often believe them. You get a promotion, and instead of joy, you feel guilt. You pursue your dream and hear that familiar whisper. Don't forget where you came from. You succeed, and that inner voice says, be careful, someone's bound to take this away. That's the insidious nature of envy when it comes from love. It makes you doubt yourself in the name of loyalty. It turns your light into a threat, not just to others, but to your sense of belonging. But here's the truth, you are allowed to grow without guilt. You are allowed to rise without waiting for everyone else to be ready. You are allowed to be extraordinary, even if it makes others uncomfortable. And you are allowed to heal. Healing begins with awareness. It begins by naming the voices, by asking, whose voice is that? Whose fear am I carrying? Whose envy have I mistaken for wisdom? And then, gently but firmly, choosing to let it go. You don't have to hate the people who hurt you to outgrow their influence. You can forgive them while setting boundaries. You can honor the love they gave, while refusing to absorb the pain they projected. You can remember them and still choose a new voice, your own. But the work doesn't stop there. Because if we're honest, we must also look at ourselves. Have I ever been that voice for someone else? Have I ever held back praise because it hurt too much to give? Have I ever wrapped my envy in concern? Have I ever stayed silent when someone I loved needed my loudest encouragement? If so, it's not the end. It's the beginning. We can begin again. We can be better. We can choose to speak life instead of fear. To celebrate instead of compare. To be the kind of presence that becomes an eternal voice of strength, of grace, of permission to be whole. Every day, we leave echoes behind. Words, silences, gestures. What kind of voice will you become in someone else's mind? Will you be the voice that haunts them with doubt, or the one that carries them through storms? Envy dies when we choose wholeness. It dies when we look at another person's light and remember that their brilliance takes nothing from our own. It dies when we remember that love, at its best, never competes, it uplifts. You will not silence every eternal voice that ever wounded you. But you can learn which ones to listen to and which ones to thank for their lesson, then gently turn down the volume. Let your voice, the one you cultivate now, become eternal for someone else. Let it be a voice that frees, not binds, that builds, not breaks, that whispers, "You are enough. You can rise. You are allowed." That is how we transform the legacy of envy into a lineage of love. And so, we must listen not just to the loud voices, but to the quiet ones that echo when no one else is speaking. We must ask ourselves, with courage and tenderness, which voices have I allowed to define me? And more importantly, which voice will I become in someone else's life? You are not bound to repeat the patterns you inherited. You are not required to carry the weight of someone else's envy. You are not obligated to make yourself smaller for the comfort of those who fear your light. You are allowed to grow without guilt. You are allowed to shine without shame. You are allowed to outgrow what once claimed to love you and still offer love in return. Let your voice, your true, healed, generous voice, be the one that echoes beyond your lifetime. Not as a wound, but as a blessing. Not as a burden, but as a light. Be the voice that says, "You are enough. You are free. You are allowed to be whole." That is how eternal voices become eternal grace.
The story doesn't end here. It's only waiting for the next chapter. Stay tuned for more from Eternal Voices.